Yeah, so we've covered most of the basics of percent by now, just basically what it is. A percent is really a fraction with 100 as the denominator. Now we get to actually use these. So percentages are one of the most useful things we do in math. And once you've got those basics of understanding, then it actually gets where we can figure stuff out. So this is where I think percentages get a little more fun. And so let me give you a word problem. The word problem says this. It says there are 500 people at a concert, okay? And it says 30% are children. Now, it doesn't say there are 30 children. It says 30%, or we'd say 30 out of 100 are children. And so the question is, how many children were there at the concert? So I'm going to put a statement. There were children at the concert. Okay. And so I'd like you to kind of pause it and figure it on your own. I bet you can figure out how many children there are. And then we're going to look at some methods that work with percentages and how we can set those up. We're going to actually solve this 3 different ways. So put the video on pause, figure it out for yourself, and then start back. Okay, I hope you've tried that, and we're going to check and see if your answer is right. I'm going to show you 3 different ways, but I'd be willing to bet that a lot of you probably even solved it differently than any of those ways. There's a lot of ways to figure it out. The first way I want to show you is we're going to call the unitary way, and there's a reason I want to do that. It's important to know what a percentage. A percentage is 1/100th, okay? And so one thing we could do is we could find out what is 1% of 500 people. Now this isn't normally how people do it, but it kind of builds some understanding, so I want to talk about it. 1% is 1/100th. So you could say 1/100th of 500. And we know from all of our fraction work we've done in the past that 1/100th of a number is the same as 1/100th times that number. So 1% or 1/100th of 500 is 500 hundredths, which we know to be 5. So 1% out of 500 people is 5 people. Every percentage is 5 people. And we have 30%. So 30% of 500 people is 30 times 5, which is 150. There were 150 children. That's the unit method. You can find out 1% very easy. It's really just dividing the whole by 100, and then you can multiply that times the percent. It works fine. We're going to look at a couple ways I think are a little bit quicker at this moment, though. Okay, so we got the same problem. There's still 500 people. There's still 30% children. So we're still after 30% of 500. And by the way, I hope that you may have done it a different way. I hope you also got 150 when you tried it. Another way I like to do it, I don't normally use the unit method. I usually say that 30% is 30 hundredths. It's 30 hundredths of 500 people. And I should write my units. We are counting in people at this moment. 30 hundredths of 500 people. And I always think that changing things to fractions make them, or I don't always, but a lot of times I think that changing things to fractions makes them easier. 30 hundredths of 500 we know is the same as 30 hundredths times 500. And of course I can divide both of these by 100, and I get 30 times 5 is 150. There's a 1 in my denominator, I don't have to write, and I have 150 people. And that's the second way. This is how you're going to usually see me doing these problems, is I'm going to usually change the percent to a fraction and just multiply it. Okay, and those are the 2 ways that the Singapore Math textbook gives. There's actually a third way. Sometimes I call this the calculator method. And the reason is it's the way I just showed you is the 2 ways I just showed you actually are much easier to do if you're doing mental math, if you're doing pencil and paper math, if you need to come up with a quick estimate. They're the best way to do simple percentage problems. But if the problems get more complicated, you may need a calculator. And when you have a calculator handy, we're going to use method 2, but with decimals. Decimals aren't always easier, but when we're doing calculator problems, or if you're a lot of people in finance use percentages all the time. and they're going to do a lot of their work on Excel or another spreadsheet program or maybe some other computer program just for their business, and it's probably going to use decimals. And so the third way is the decimal method. It's exactly like what we just did. 30 hundredths times 500 is what we did. The only difference is we can actually, if we have a fraction over 100, it can be easier sometimes just to write it as a decimal. 30 hundredths is 0.3 or 0.30. We've already talked about that, right? 30 hundredths is 3/10. You can change the percentage to a decimal and then multiply them. And like I said, this isn't how I'd recommend doing it normally, but if you are doing it on a calculator, it is how I would do it. 3/10 times 500, and if you put that in a calculator, you would also get 150 children.